This is the Ebb and Hawk podcast. Spoiler alert for the Knights of the Old Republic series and the Star Wars films and TV shows. Hello there! Welcome to the Ebb and Hawk, a podcast discussing Star Wars news and Knights of the Old Republic. Today we are joined by Astrodroid, and this is it. We are pitching the KOTOR trilogy. Listen up, Disney and Lucasfilm. We are helping you out for free. Spoiler alert for the Knights of the Old Republic series and the Star Wars films and TV shows. This is where the KOTOR cinematic universe begins. All right, Astrodroid. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Long
time coming, and now it's here, so...
Absolutely excited.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So to get started, we just wanted to ask you, what is your favorite Star Wars trilogy?
So my favorite Star Wars trilogy, now I love them all, but I did grow up with the original trilogy, so I'm going to have to go with that one. The original is near and dear to me. It's the one I grew up on, and it's the one I fell in love with Star Wars with.
Oh, nice. And then who is your favorite Star Wars trio?
A lot of good options, and I think that the trios kind of change and are kind of fluid throughout the films, but got to go with the classic Luke, Leia, and Han for my favorite.
Yeah. Solid choices. Coden, what about you? What's your favorite trilogy and trio?
So I'd have to say the original trilogy as well. Just being the original and just the attention to detail in the story and everything. I like the sequel trilogy, or not the sequel, the prequel trilogy a lot too. Just the again attention to detail and just the amount of time spent with like developing characters and everything. The best Star Wars trio, in my opinion, I think I would side with Han, Luke, and Obi-Wan, just because there's kind of it's a pretty similar dynamic between Luke, Han, and Leia, but there's a little bit more of just kind of like the crazy but wise old man kind of mixed in with the kind of the irresponsible teenager. I don't know, I kind of like that dynamic a little bit.
I think the original trilogy is the most solid trilogy, but I mean, I did grow up with the prequel trilogy. The prequels aren't as consistent, I would say, but they have some really good world building, and I do like how it's probably the closest we'll get to on screen to something like a Greek tragedy. So I do like that, but I would say I would give the edge to the original trilogy. And then my favorite Star Wars trio is probably Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme. I just think that it's probably because they're who I grew up with, and it's just an interesting dynamic, I would say.
I have a follow-up question just for kicks. Astro, with your
Sure.
name, which Astro droid inspired your name?
Oh, R2-D2, absolutely. He's my favorite character in all of Star Wars. I was just really kind of connected with him ever since I was a little kid. So, R2 droid and really all the droids. One of my favorite parts of the saga for sure.
I was worried you were going to say R4 because he's a little incompetent of a Astro droid.
I honestly thought it was the mouse droid, but yeah. Oh, well. So R2's awesome. So we just did a comparative like KOTOR parallel with the T3H8 and T3M4 with R4 and R2D2. So that was fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Love the droids.
Yeah. All right, let's just take a quick break and we'll be back and talk about the trio of KOTOR. So, since we kind of talked about trios of the trilogies and kind of our favorite dynamics, I just wanted to start by asking you, Astro, who do you think the trio of KOTOR trilogy would be?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the kind of when you're going through KOTOR, just naturally, I think you have that trio of your character, or Revan, Karth, and Bastila. But I think in an adaptation, it's going to really sort of be dependent, kind of on where you're going and how you want to develop those stories. So I think that for me, I think a main trio of Revan, Karth, and Bastila. But then I'd like to see that kind of change up and almost get some smaller trios as you move around through the worlds, just to kind of help to flesh out the story a little bit better, because there's 10 characters and we need to have them all kind of interact in some meaningful way. So I think it just needs to be a little bit fluid that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Coden, what's your take?
So I'm also kind of on the mindset of Revan, Bastila, and Karth. I just think that between the three of them, they have, I think, the most relevant dialogue to just the kind of the core story. And I think it would just work best to primarily follow those three. Though I think to still have little inserts of some of the other characters is important. I still think that the story would focus or would work the best just focusing on those three.
So I think we have a consensus, because I think that the best trio for a KOTOR adaptation would be Revan, Bastila, and Karth as well, because the main story kind of revolves around them. With Revan, you have a great arc, and I would say with Bastila, she kind of affects a lot of the story, and Karth is along with you the whole way, and he has to kind of deal and grapple with a lot. It would be a fascinating trio to kind of watch throughout a potential KOTOR trilogy. I do think you can definitely incorporate different characters at different times, because Bastila will kind of leave your party for a bit, and you can incorporate different characters, kind of have some different interactions. I mean, we do kind of play around with, like, maybe, like, some characters, like, maybe won't necessarily be with you the entire time, but they'll affect the story and kind of, like, enter and leave when it serves the story best, But we can talk about that more in the future. But I do think they're a solid trio, and I think with Revan and Bastila too, you have a great male and female dynamic. Like, I would say that Revan is the lead character, but I wouldn't say that Bastila is just a foil to him. Like, she's a major character, and she's not just kind of like reacting to what he does, So everyone's character is developed, and the more I play KOTOR, the more I kind of learn to kind of understand what makes Karth tick too. So
I was just going to say, no, I think if you're building the story kind of around those three, and then it's easy to bring in Canderous, because has kind of the shared background with Revan, or later on after you meet Jolie, and he's sort of kind of the flip side of he's left the Jedi Order and things. So just to kind of get some different perspective, and I think that trio can change up a little bit throughout a film trilogy for sure. But yeah, definitely I think Karth, Revan, and Bastila for me.
Yeah, I think Canderous is a great source of like good Mandalorian backstory. From the different kind of side characters that are part of your party, he definitely has the most to offer, and so it would make sense to use his character to kind of bring a little bit more depth in between like what led Revan to get to the point of the beginning of the story. But it would be weird to not have Revan as the main character. Say, for example, if they decided to, go this other direction and put Bastila as the main character, it would just be a little bit odd and it wouldn't quite flow for the KOTOR story, and it would definitely have to be Revan as the main character in this one.
I mean, I think that Revan, Bastila, and Karth would kind of be the main characters. And I think, like, when you're watching The Force Awakens, I would say that Finn and Rey were kind of equally leads in that film. And then that was kind of not the way it happened going forward. I would say, like, Revan is definitely the character you're kind of seeing the story through their eyes, because you're experiencing the story from that point of view. So if they did follow Bastila's point of view, like, the twist wouldn't really be a twist. So I guess what I mean is, like, it's kind of like Revan and Bastila are bonded. So Bastila's kind of not just there to be a foil to Revan, but I would say, like, she kind of is the heart of the story, even if she's not, like, the lead. Like, she's not the Harry Potter of Harry Potter.
Cool.
Not to bring Harry Potter into it, but... And before we move on to our next topic, I was just thinking about a post I made on our Instagram that was kind of incorporated Anakin giving a pear to Padme through the Force, and guess what that got me thinking of? It got me thinking of apples, and which made me think about Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. So I was just thinking, like, if you guys want to help us out, like, if you want to, like, give us a pear through the Force, what we appreciate is people reviewing us on Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts, because it helps us out through, like, some algorithm that I don't understand, but when you review it and subscribe, it helps more people enjoy the Ebb and Honk podcast and see the Ebb and Honk podcast. So
just don't be as awkward as
there's
Anakin,
a lot,
because gee whiz.
I mean, sand, sand and pears and just everything. Yeah, so that was our plug this time. So Star Wars trilogies. This is gonna be a fun topic. So here we're gonna talk about how Star Wars trilogies are set up and how we would set up a KOTOR trilogy. I just wanted to start out by saying that I got help with this structure from my friend Ian, and he was an old friend of mine from a screenwriting class, and maybe someday, it hasn't quite worked out that he's been able to be on, but maybe someday, because we've been trying since, like, the Hero's Journey episode. But he was telling me about the pattern for Star Wars trilogies, and he said that the pattern at the beginning of each Star Wars trilogy, you kind of have a heroic journey. So The Phantom Menace, A New Hope, and The Force Awakens, they're your hero's journey, where a hero or heroine is brought to the front and they kind of experience a Campbellian hero's journey. And then 2, Attack of the Clones, and 5, Empire Strikes Back, and 8, The Last Jedi, are kind of your genre films. And 2, of course, is kind of a detective film noir. You have Obi-Wan trying to track down Jango Fett, find out who the murderer is, and then find this army. Where is this army coming from? And then you have Anakin and Padme kind of in like a film noir relationship, that kind of that building. And then with Empire Strikes Back, it's kind of a hard one to crack, but it's kind of like what lies beneath. It's kind of an examination in parallelism, I would say. And this quote comes from Ian, and he says, Empire is a tough one, as it was the first to explore a theme approach past the first heroic journey, but it is there. The most clearest theme, in my opinion, is what lies beneath the surface. Yoda equals Jedi, master. Lando equals betrayer. Vader equals father. Leia, the Force user / deeper connection. Han equals lover and sacrifice. Ben equals liar and Luke, the new unknown, which is why the Jedi starts out in a brief mystery with him in black. Has he turned to the dark side like his father? We were to ask, no. In this chapter, it's redemption using parallelism. And then with 8, The Last Jedi, it's kind of like a kung fu film. Rey kind of has to prove, like, if you ever see, like, kung fu films, you have a student who's looking for a master, and at first the master is like, I will not teach you, and then they end up getting taught. And then Poe kind of has the same story to an extent, too. And then with 3, 6, and 9, you have the redemption or fall. And it's really just a fall in the case of Revenge of the Sith. And with Return of the Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, you have a redemption. And I would say that, like, the genre allows you to explore characters more and in different situations than you would expect, which is, like, why I think the second iteration in each trilogy is the most fascinating, I would say. But Astro, how would you break down a KOTOR trilogy?
Yeah, so I think you're probably going to start it off, the same way that all of the other trilogies started off, kind of a hero's journey. We're kind of waking up on the Endar Spire, don't really know what's going on, and then we're kind of set on this journey, picking up kind of skills and our cast of characters along the way. Until I think you get through Terrace and Dantooine, and it kind of ends there where you're with the Jedi Council, and you're kind of set on this journey to go find the star maps and kind of figure this thing out. So I think it's definitely, in my eyes, needs to kind of play along those same lines as the rest of the Star Wars trilogies and open up on that hero's journey.
How would you handle maybe a second and third movie in the trilogy?
Yeah, so I think I really like along the lines of the prequels, kind of that film noir, more detective style of storytelling as we're going through looking for different star maps, on Tatooine, Kashyyyk, Manon, kind of up to the Leviathan, where hunting for clues and traveling, from planet to planet, getting a little bit more, backstory on some of the characters, but really sort of kind of playing into those more mystery tropes, trying to figure out the history of these things, where they came from, who put them there, and why all of these people are starting to recognize you as you're finding them. And then to kind of wrap it up, I think it's going to be redemption. Certainly, we have kind of the fall of Bastila, but she's redeemed through the end. And I know in the game you can play it out a couple of different ways, but I would think, in my mind at least, that a film is going to give our characters a good redemption arc, and that kind of plays nicely going forward with any sort of furthering adaptations. But kind of going, maybe starting a third film at Korriban there at the Sith Temple, all the way up to the Star Forge. So seeing the characters kind of at their low point there after Bastila leaves the party, and coming back through that redemption arc.
Great takes. Coden, how would you break it down?
Oh, this is pretty tough. I'd with how many characters and planets there are to break it down, there's gonna have to be a lot of cuts, but I kind of would want to see a similar structure to A New Hope as the first film, where where I mean, we spend as much time as we need to on Terrace, and then we just kind of jump through some of these acts like really quick to get to the climax. But I know that it would be more interesting to get off Terrace in the middle of the movie and not reserve like getting off Terrace as part of the climax. But that would also lead to the possibility of having to extend to finding the first star map on Dantooine, because there's a lot of great points where you could kind of give a good resolution to a self-contained story. Trying to find a way to kind of fit all that together though, because that is a lot of content to get all the way up to the point where you find the first star map. Like you'd have to, like in my perspective, if it were up to me, I'd end up cutting Zalabar and oh, what's her name? Mission.
Mission.
Thank you. Yeah, Mission Vale. I'd probably end up like consider cutting their roles just because of how much it kind of sidesteps Terrace, which may or may not be a popular opinion, but I think just in the terms of like telling a like getting a full like plot point, climax and resolution, that would probably be necessary to me. And that kind of leaks over to my second film idea, where if we spent the entire second film hopping three other three other star maps, you would want the second film to like come back and be better than the first one. And so I would want to say that like narrowing it down to maybe just one other piece, maybe two other pieces of the star map total, and kind of like bring up the excitement of like getting through the different labyrinths to find those star maps. And then yeah, maybe with the second movie ending with Revan finding out that he's Revan, and then use that to kind of cliffhanger bring the third movie to like the what are we going to do about the Star Forge and the conclusion to the story there. That's kind of like my rough sketch idea of what I would do to handle the trilogy. Just also trying to think of like the most successful way to keep people's interest to go from film to film.
Because I don't think like every character that is your companion in the KOTOR game needs to be in your party 100% of the time. But I do think like that each character they incorporated at least adds something, even if like in the case of T3 and 4 that it's just a bit of that Star Wars flavor. But in a future episode, I think 2 episodes from now, we're going to be talking about I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, sorry, it's been a while, but we'll be talking about the dramatis personae of Knights of the Old Republic, and just kind of like what each role could bring to the table and where they could make the most emphasis and like how to plot out good stories for them. But anyways, for a KOTOR trilogy, funnily enough, I think the film that was easiest for me to know the beginning, middle, and end would be the third movie, which is usually, it seems like most trilogies, the third is usually a step down. But for me, the hardest movie to kind of figure out and crack would be the first movie, like the hero's journey. And I think part of that might be because Terrace in the game takes a long time compared to the rest of the game and the rest of the planets, I would say. And I do think like it has some good world building of the Knights of the Old Republic era, and a lot of characters are established there. But I think like in a movie, you would begin in space, kind of like how we were talking about in episode 30, like as opposed to A New Hope's pursued ship. you're on a sinking ship and you have to get off, and you get marooned on Terrace, and there's a Sith quarantine. So I would say you begin on the Underspire, and throughout the movie you have a heroic journey with Revan and the companions. And I would say, for the sake of keeping things interesting, I would say keep Terrace maybe the first third and maybe first half of the movie at most. Maybe just so people can kind of see the different levels. But you don't want people to get bored, you know? And I think Terrace could be interesting because it's kind of like a Coruscant that gets destroyed. And while you see a little bit of world building in Attack of the Clones on Coruscant and in the Clone Wars, you don't get to see as much, and I think like the different levels are interesting. But I would say you get Bastila maybe around the 40-minute mark, and then leave as soon as possible. Get off Terrace and go to Dantooine. And Dantooine is also kind of interesting to crack, because it's kind of like you're in a remote bit of nature, kind of after such a big, corrupt cityscape planet. But the vibe you kind of get on Dantooine is that it's kind of like a world of adventure for Jedi, but you're not being told everything. So there's kind of like it's pleasant, it's peaceful, it looks beautiful, but I'm being thrust into this journey that I don't quite understand, and I feel like there's more to the story. And Karth's paranoia kind of plays into that, I think. And I would have them maybe discover the first star map, but maybe it's not a star map, it's kind of more like, just kind of like a guide to be like, this is like X marks the spot, like this is where you need to go. And then where you began on Terrace, which is like a jungle of a city, you have a jungle of a jungle, just to kind of have some parallelism comparing cities to like nature, you know? And then I would like kind of just play up the Wookiees, like nature versus like Zerka Corporation, and find the first star map, everything's a-okay. Maybe Jolie would be at the end, or maybe he'd be at the beginning of the second movie, but we'll figure that out later. And then you have maybe you could like have a climactic battle, and maybe have Bastila use battle meditation so you see it, not just hear about it. And just kind of have a little bit more of a climactic battle, so like you kind of feel like, oh, we did stuff, you know? Like maybe Calo Nord and Darth Bandon team up and there's a big duel, but the Team Ebon Hawk is successful and things are looking up. It's a good hero's journey, you know? And then I would say like the genre I would like to see in the second iteration would be kind of like that adventure, treasure hunting, Indiana Jones kind of vibe. Because, I mean, you're literally kind of hunting down, like, ancient star maps and trying to find a big MacGuffin, you know? And I would start that one off, like, on Tatooine, I would say, because I feel like it's a good character-building planet. And maybe they wouldn't use Tatooine, maybe desert planets are overused, but at least like what happens on Tatooine could happen first. And then I would have Manon, because I think it's interesting because it's like a planet where the Sith and Republic are kind of in a Cold War because they both want that Kolto. And I think it symbolically in a story could kind of talk about some people's allegiances, like with the lighter dark side, like Revan, Bastila, and other characters that kind of fall to the dark side or come to the light, like you could kind of have some fun with that. And the ocean kind of contrasts nicely with Tatooine. Maybe you'd want to see Kashyyyk in the second movie, just so there's like more worlds. But then before they're gonna go to the third star map world, there's the Leviathan, and then you kind of have that reveal. Bastila is taken captive, and how I would actually end the movie is I would just have Bastila kind of be in not a great headspace because she was kind of lying to Revan. And if you kind of listen to her, you kind of know, like, she's gonna fall to the dark side. So for me, it's not much of a cliffhanger to be like, I wonder what's gonna happen to Bastila. And then you see, like, her tortured forever in a third movie, and then it's like, oh cool, she went to the dark side. Like, I would rather maybe kind of like end the movie with like showing her trying to defeat Malak by any means necessary, and like maybe in her anger she tries to use battle meditation, but maybe like the Jedi fleet came to rescue them, and in her anger by using the dark side, like she accidentally kind of takes out like a big chunk of the Republic, you know, and like that kind of messes with her, and she kind of turns to the dark side. Or even if it's just kind of a smaller thing where she kind of realizes like that the council is not as good as like she's been saying it is, you know. So I would just end it like with her going to the dark side after like Revan and like the Ebon Hawk had to leave, and Revan has to kind of grapple with like, okay, I'm literally Revan, like what am I gonna do with this? And you could end with like maybe his face in part shadow, part light, you know. That's fun. The third movie, I would actually maybe start it out with a flashback, kind of explaining how, through Bastila's point of view, like how Revan came to have his memory wiped. Kind of like you kind of have the Jedi Strike Team battle, and you kind of see how it happened. And it's kind of like the truth that Darth Malak said in the movie is confirmed through Bastila's point of view, because Bastila and Revan are still kind of connected, even if they're like not necessarily on the same team at the moment. And that's how I would start it out. And then I think Revan has to go to Korriban and kind of be confronted with all the Sith stuff, and kind of he has to dig deep down and realize, like, and think about like, who am I? What do I want? Where am I going from here? And maybe he doesn't necessarily become like, you know, like an Obi-Wan Kenobi character, but he's like, I'm at least allied with the light side, you know, or at least I'm gonna just try to redeem Bastila and like make sure she doesn't fall down the path that I did, you know. And then they end up finding Lihan. You could maybe kind of play with Lihan a bit, because it's an island planet. Maybe at the first there could be a storm on it, so it's kind of like, it looks a little bit more eerie, but at the end when things are resolved it can be all sunny, you know? That's just kind of something I was thinking. And then the Starforge, you could have that battle, and yeah, I would definitely say it ends on a high note, and it would be a redemption rather than a fall. But I think that KOTOR has an original trilogy story set in a prequel trilogy universe, and you definitely have an existing and highly acclaimed story with a great trove of characters, and it breaks down into a trilogy well. And I think Disney and Lucasfilm it would be good for them to adapt this property. And I think that KOTOR works well with the pattern that Lucas established, as well as the ring theory, I would say. And because the setting is 4,000 years before the Skywalker saga, you could reinvent the visuals and the sound design so things are a bit different. But one thing I wonder, I would like to hear from like Astro and Coden is, do you think that the format that all three trilogies have used should be used in the future, or is that too ingrained in the Skywalker saga and maybe it's time for just a different format?
I think myself, I'd be okay with a different format. I believe with Rogue One and Solo, both neither of those had the crawl, and both felt a little bit different. Not Rogue One so much, but Solo definitely felt a little bit different. And I think I would be okay with going a little bit of a different direction cinematically, just to kind of separate this from the what we'd seen with the Skywalker saga. Just give it a little bit of a different feel. Not off the rails. You still want it to feel like a Star Wars movie, but I think that they would have some liberty to maybe make some different decisions, cinematically, and just kind of the way that the movie plays in terms of different flashbacks and maybe montage sections, things like that.
I think for me, the opening sequence as kind of the traditional Star Wars sequence works really well for KOTOR. I mean, in the game, you got the opening crawl. It tells you a little bit of the prologue, kind of what to expect to see in the opening scene, and then it moves. It transitions over to the space battle. I think that does work pretty well with KOTOR. But as far as the trilogy format goes, where you got like the hero's journey, and then like kind of the adventure film, and then the resolution, I think that can be shaken up a little bit, because I think what's important is the first film is like a really good, like self-contained story that people would want to have a follow-up for, and then have the follow-up just kind of be that kind of like the continuation, almost like a restart, but a continuation of the story that then leads into the conclusion story, which is the third film. And please, can we stick with one storyline for all three movies and not change our minds through the second movie, please?
It's hard because I think KOTOR, the way it was written, it was meant to kind of parallel the original trilogy and a bit of the prequel trilogy. I think how you could shake things up is definitely play up like kind of the different look and sound and different universe, and just kind of stick to the great twist, I would say, and just like embrace the different time period. And it's just a whole different galaxy. You have a whole bunch of Jedi, a whole bunch of Sith, and there's a whole bunch of Mandalorians, and the status quo is definitely different from the Skywalker saga. So even if like there's some beats within the trilogy format that I think would be the same, I think they wouldn't be overshadowing, and I think the story stands on its own, that I don't think most people kind of realize that the pattern exists in all the trilogies. So I think I would be kind of comfortable with this pattern as long as they're adapting a good story and just really not taking the universe and setting for granted, and kind of pushing the edge and trying new things with sound design, different visuals. Just have fun with kind of creating a new feel to the galaxy.
I'd have to agree with just finding a new like visual template. I think the only ship that translates over to the other film is the Hammerhead Corvette, because like technically speaking at the time that was kind of like the big kind of like the mega ship of the era, other than the Sith interdictor. And so, but both these ships are technically very old tech compared to the the prequel and and the regular and the sequel trilogy. So it would be kind of cool to see like the in some way or another the Hammerhead Corvette kind of being shown as kind of like the pride of innovation, but then around it you kind of see a lived-in universe of just very rugged, kind of like solutions to space and things.
That's what we think would be good. Let's just take a quick break, and when we get back, we will talk about the KOTOR cinematic universe. So, kind of just one thing I was kind of thinking of for fun is like, why should you stop at KOTOR? Astro and Coden, like, what other films would you like to see from the Knights of the Old Republic era?
I was thinking about this a little bit, and I actually think the way Knights of the Republic is kind of a nice contained story. Then you go into Knights of the Old Republic 2, which is a little bit more kind of open ended. It's I think it's set 5 or 10 years in the future after the end of Knights of the Old Republic. So I actually think it might be interesting to do like the trilogy for the first game, Knights of the Old Republic, and then transition into like a television series for Knights of the Old Republic 2, which you could just call the Old Republic, but it would kind of explore kind of that period directly after Knights of the Old Republic. But then you would get to learn a little bit kind of about Darth Treya, how Nihilus is coming into power, and it lets you explore that a little bit more and a little bit more open-ended. Like I said, because the second game didn't really have a complete resolution. We never got that third game, unfortunately. But I think a TV series coming off of the trilogy, I think would be a really interesting kind of way to tell into that new story.
I'd have to agree with Astro a little bit on this because the story beats of KOTOR 2 have, it almost feels like a updated version of KOTOR 1 with a heavy emphasis on like the whys of the Force and just kind of like the perspective morality of the Force. And so I too would rather see something completely different where we look at the world of KOTOR 2 and have have some certain characters like Nihilus and them in part of the TV show's story, but I would like to see just more like kind of like how The Mandalorian does, where you've got a bunch of these like one-off episodes told in like the particular world, but we don't have to stick with one or two characters. Maybe we can follow a large assortment of characters over the course of a season or multiple seasons in the world of KOTOR.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because in that period, if they're going around hunting down the Jedi, I think that would be kind of a really interesting way to tell it. Like I said, in like a television series that basically would allow you to explore any sort of area of that. You'd still kind of tick the boxes of these characters we want to learn more about, but just kind of the world building of that time period, I think would be super interesting.
I also feel the
Yeah,
same about
'cause
SOTOR, but SOTOR kind of opens up the possibilities of getting more in depth of the other faction, the Sith faction, and being able to have a like fleshed out Sith faction character and or multiple characters and kind of their perspective of the war versus the Republic perspective.
part of me, I just wonder, like, do you adapt the released version of Knights of the Old Republic 2? Do you adapt the restored content version? Do you adapt a completely kind of a hybrid of those, a new version? Would it be a movie? Would it be 3 movies or a TV show? And then would you adapt like your own third kind of wrap up trilogy or movie or TV show? So I kind of have no idea what to do with Knights of the Old Republic 2. Some days I'm kind of like, yeah, Disney Plus show. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, it needs to be on the big screen. But one thing I kind of worry about is just Disney would be like, people like that Darth Nihilus, he has an iconic mask. What if we just bring him into the first kind of movie because we want to sell that Funko Pop, you know? And it's like, I just kind of worry about that sometimes. I guess some other, like, the way I've kind of described, like, my ideal KOTOR cinematic universe as I see it, like, right now, is I would like to have the first game for sure adapted into a trilogy. And then if some people were kind of upset that some of the side quests were cut out, you could maybe have like a Galaxy of Adventures cartoon style animation show with Mission in Zalbar, kind of like the fun, like kind of kiddie, you know, characters, and like they could do kind of their own thing if they're not necessarily like in all 3 movies 100% of the time, you know? Because in my mind, I would have Mission and Zalbar like kind of have a new family, find a new home on Kashyyyk. Because I do like the Mission character. I think she kind of represents like the kind of childlike innocence, and she's kind of the biggest link to Terrace you have, but I don't think you necessarily need her like in the second and third movie the whole time. But I do think like she does bring a lot to the universe. But and then after the first trilogy's been adapted, I think you could definitely have like the Mandalorian Wars cartoon or something where that kind of shows more of the exile and the kind of like the background of like Revan, Malik, and Bastila, kind of the lead up to, maybe you could like end it like their siege of Mandalore could be like the Jedi Strike Team. I think that'd be cool. And then whatever the second iteration and third iteration would be, and then I suppose you could adapt Star Wars: The Old Republic, but that's how I would do it. Any other comments from Astro or Coden?
No, the only other thing that I think would be good in terms of the storytelling would be to do like a Marvel run comic of the Mandalorian Wars, and you get a little bit more information about Clan Ordo and kind of Revan and Malik and the fall. Maybe get introduced to Bastila. Like you said, learning her battle meditation, but I think that plays really well into a comic book, just visually, and able to tell kind of those more niche stories about the war. I think that would be a good storytelling medium for that.
Yeah, I'd say that like to not shy away from other forms of media to tell like the bigger picture, I think is a great idea, because for a movie, I want to kind of be taken on a ride and like hit all the points that make sense and flow with the kind of like the told story. And then if I want to, I can go back and do a lot of digging on whatever subject I want to dig on, like Mandalorian Wars or some of these kind of like off the wall side quests, especially with the idea of KOTOR 2 kind of turning into a TV show, like some side quests that don't make it into a show, being able to see that in a comic or novella form, I think would add a lot to kind of like the expanded universe, which I think it could use a lot of help, since some of it is no longer relevant.
I mean, in the future, I think we'll talk about the old Knights of the Old Republic comics that kind of had a little bit of the backstory of the Mandalorian Wars and Revan and Malak, but for me it kind of ended too early, in my opinion. But
not to mention the Revan novel
so
didn't do a great job about kind of bridging it all.
Yeah, I think the Revan novel, we'll talk about that eventually too. It's just not my favorite. I think they just wanted to get on to the Old Republic, and they're like, what about the beloved characters of Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2? And they're like, we don't care. Kill them off. Or, just they get old and die and no one cares,
Let the past die.
So I try to like the Revan novel. I try to be open-minded, but we'll get there one day. So, but yeah, any other comments, Astrodroid?
No, I think in terms of kind of that universe, I think that that's what I'd like to see. Some more television shows, maybe some comics. But yeah, I think that's.
I think it's a rich. It could be a rich branch of the Star Wars universe, and I think Disney and Lucasfilm would be wise to tap into it. So where can our listeners find you, Astrodroid?
So you can find me on Instagram, and my handle is astro_droid_. And I'm on there. I post, just try to post something different about Star Wars every day. So, be it collecting stuff or, whatever films or TV shows or books I'm reading. Just a little bit of Star Wars every day. So yeah, come find me on Instagram, astro_droid_.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. It was a great podcast. But yeah, speaking of Instagram, you can find us on Instagram at Ebonhawk Podcast, and our podcast, The Ebonhawk, can also be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as everywhere else that Anchor podcasts are distributed. Subscriptions, reviews, and shares help us out. And our email is ebonhawkpodcast@gmail.com. You can email us your questions and business inquiries there.
All right, and then you can find me on Twitch, Instagram, and Twitter just by searching KOTOR. And typically, if you want to talk to me live, that's going to be on the Twitch, and so you just follow either the Instagram or Twitter to find out when I go live Thursday evenings, usually around 6 or 7 p.m. Mountain Standard. But there, play some. This week it's either going to be KOTOR or some Squadrons, depending on how much your finger's feeling. So we'll let you know on Thursday. Our intro and outro themes were composed by Alistair Shorman. He can be found at alistairsounds.wixsite.com/alistairsounds. Our transition music was composed by Christian Walker, and he can be found at christianwalkermusic.com.
This has been the Ebonhawk Podcast. May the Force be with you. We will be back soon. Bye for now.